Hello and welcome to Murphy's Garden, and in this video we will be exploring the gardens of Chatsworth House. If you're new to our channel, we're a gardening YouTube channel which focuses on the day-to-day maintenance of our 1 acre garden here in North Shropshire. We're constantly developing our family garden and designing and creating new areas, and to this end we like to visit other gardens to get inspiration, but also just to have a really good day out. And one such visit was this summer when Olivia, my daughter, and I visited one of Britain's most historically significant gardens, the gardens of Chatsworth House. However, although we're a gardening channel, I felt we couldn't fully understand the gardens of Chatsworth without understanding the history and the family who live there. Chatsworth is the seat of the Duke of Devonshire and has belonged to the Cavendish family since 1549. And this incredibly long legacy perhaps accounts for the loved homely feel. So if you haven't done so already, then watch the previous video which explains Chatsworth's link to royalty, power and influence. And as a home of distinction and at the height of fashion, the gardens have a long history and a complex blend of features from 6 different centuries, covering 105 acres, and they attract over 300,000 visitors a year. So let's explore this catwalk of gardening throughout the centuries, shedding light into the origins of the English country garden style that we all know and love so well. Although there is a long legacy of the Cavendish family living here, it seems that, like the house, the same few members of the family had the greatest influence on the garden as they did the house. The foundations of Chatsworth were laid by Bess of Hardwick and her husband William Cavendish. It was Bess who persuaded her second husband to move to her home county of Derbyshire and buy the plot of land on which Chatsworth House now stands. Although, as we previously discussed, only the hunting tower of the original house remains, and the Elizabethan garden from that time no longer survives. The garden would have been much smaller than the garden we see here today, with terraces to the east of the house, where the main lawn is now, ponds and fountains to the south, and fish ponds to the west by the river. The next major influence on the gardens were made by the first Duke between 1684 and 1707, and while rebuilding the house he created Baroque gardens. The first Duke was one of the first Englishmen to fall for the extravagant creation of formal gardens, which were already in fashion in France, Italy and Holland in the 17th century. The Baroque garden style was based on symmetry and the principle of imposing order on nature. The garden featured numerous parterres cut into the slopes above the house and many fountains, garden buildings and classical sculptures. So let's have a look at some of these features in more detail and head back in time to August. So this first feature that we see is called the Cascade, and also the Cascade House. The Cascade was an engineering feat in its time, carrying water through the heart of the garden. The Cascade comprises of 23 steps, descending for 60 metres in a design that mimics a natural waterfall, an early example of a natural-inspired design and sustainability. The Cascade is part of a complex system of waterworks that use the natural incline of the landscape to channel water from the moors to the river, feeding the garden water features, and since 1893 also powering a turbine which provides electricity to the house. In 1703, a grand Baroque temple or a Cascade house designed by Thomas Archer was added at the top. In 2004, the Cascade was voted England's best water feature. Each of the steps is slightly different and with a variety of textures, so that each gives a different sound when water runs over it and down it. Sadly, centuries of use has weakened the Cascade, and serious water leakage through the stones has put it at significant structural risk. To prevent further damage, the Cascade has been turned off and major fundraising is underway to raise the funds needed to begin this major restoration project to preserve and safeguard it for the future for generations to enjoy. The next feature we see is the Canal Pond, dug between 1702 and 1703, and it is 283 metres long and 30 metres wide. This rectangular lake to the south of the house is set a few inches higher than the south lawn, so that when viewed from the south end of the pond, the house appears to rise from the water. There was also a fountain, named the Great Fountain, in the north end of the pond when it was dug out originally, which has subsequently been replaced by the fountain we see here today. The next feature is the Seahorse Fountain, and by now you will see that water played an important role in the garden. This sculptural fountain in a circular pond on the lawn between the house and the Canal Pond was originally the centrepiece of the main parterre. It stands in the centre of the south lawn and is fed by water flowing from a pipe from the base of the Cascade. The pressure resulting from the 50-foot drop provides the force needed for the display here. And yet more water, this time the ring pond. The ring pond is a survivor from the 17th century gardens, and it originally lay in the middle of a formal plantation of trees with this willow fountain at its centre. This is the first Duke's greenhouse and was built in 1690, and it's a low, long building with 10 arched windows and a temple-like centrepiece. It was originally sited looking south, overlooking an enclosed ornamental pool, but by the 18th century the fashion for highly formal gardens with enclosed spaces and sudden views had given way to a trend for a more natural open landscape. The fourth Duke took down the orangery and completely rebuilt it in its current location in 1750. When the second Duke inherited the garden, he made very few changes. However, a year before his death, there were initial attempts made to simplify the geometric patterns, and the formal parterre on the south front was levelled and turfed over. The third and fourth Dukes continued this work. There were even more features, but all but the three we have discussed were removed and their ponds filled in. The fourth Duke commissioned the famous landscape architect Lancelot Capabilty Browne from the late 1750s until 1765 to transform his garden into the fashionable naturalistic landscape style of the day. Most of the ponds and parterres were turned into lawns, but the features we have Many trees were planted, including various American species imported from Philadelphia in 1759. The main aim of the work was to improve integration of the garden and the park. Browne's work at Chatsworth came relatively early on in his career as an independent landscape architect, at a time when his style was still becoming established. Chatsworth includes what were to become all his signature features, including smooth rolling grasslands running up to the house, a natural looking lake, trees planted singly or in belts and clumps, particularly on hills, and a carriage drive with carefully planned views. Indeed, the approach to Chatsworth, with its falling parkland in the foreground and views of the bridge and house beyond, backed by steeply rising wooded slopes, is one of the most impressive approaches to a country house in England. Appearing absolutely natural, but most definitely not, Capabilty Browne believed that if people thought his landscapes were beautiful and natural, then he had been successful in his aim. His talent blossomed whilst working as a head gardener at Stowe in Buckinghamshire before setting up his own business in 1751. He combined artistic talent, technical skills in architecture, engineering and landscaping with a sound business sense and scrupulous honesty. His work at Chatsworth led on to work on large country estates all over Britain, throughout Europe and beyond during the 18th century. His nickname, Capabilty Browne, came for his fondness for describing country estates as having great capabilities for improvement. In 1764 he became the royal gardener to King George III and continued to work hard up to his death in 1783, aged 67. And now on the scene comes the sixth Duke, and the sixth Duke's influence on Chatsworth, as we saw in the last video, was monumental, and so too was his influence in the garden. He's definitely my favourite. This was an incredibly exciting time as plant hunters were discovering so many new and exotic plants from all over the world. In 1826, a 23-year-old named Joseph Paxton, who had trained at Kew Gardens, was appointed head gardener at Chatsworth. The sixth Duke had inherited Chatsworth 15 years earlier, until then had shown little interest in improving the neglected gardens. He was probably quite busy with his home decor, but he soon formed a productive and extravagantly funded partnership with Paxton, who proved to be the most innovative garden designer of his era and remains the greatest single influence on the Chatsworth garden. Sarah, his wife, also played a huge role in caring for plants and managing the numerous roles of head gardener in her husband's absence. The features that survive from that time are numerous, and we will explore a few of them. The sixth Duke's time was one of plant hunting expeditions with major new species readily discovered by intrepid botanists, and the Duke was among the most generous of sponsors. In 1829 he took an additional 8 acres of park into the garden to create a pinetum, and in 1835 Paxton began work on an arboretum planned as a systematic succession of trees in accordance with botanical classification. Chatsworth has some of the oldest UK specimens of species such as Douglas fir and the giant sequoia. Also in this part of the garden is the Grotto Pond, originally a fish pond breeding fish for the Chatsworth table. The 6th Duke's mother had a rustic grotto built at the end of the 18th century, and the area around the pond is now planted for autumn colour. The Duke and Paxton shared a desire to create a world-class collection of plants, and to this end they needed to prioritise the construction of glasshouses to protect tender plants from the unpredictable, inclement Derbyshire weather. The India House is the sole survivor of 3 glasshouses built by Paxton to house the 6th Duke's orchid collection, which were gathered from all over the world. Today it has a dual purpose as a vinery housing the Chatsworth Prize-winning Muscat of Alexandria grape, and as a peach house where a white-fleshed peach called Champion is grown. And outside Paxton's greenhouses are these beautiful cold frames. Another structure called the Case is 91 metres long and acts as protective cover for the tender plants that were grown here. Originally called the Conservative Wall, it was designed by Joseph Paxton in 1838. The case is backed by an ingenious system of flues and hot water pipes to keep the temperature high enough in the winter for half-hardy plants such as figs, peaches, nectarines, apricots and various shrubs to grow successfully here. Another glasshouse was built, but sadly no longer survives. The Great Conservatory, also known as the Great Stove, was the largest glasshouse in the world at that time. Paxton and architect Decimus Burton designed this glasshouse, which was begun in 1836 and completed in 1841 at a cost of over £33,000. It was 84 metres long and 37 metres wide, and it was 19 metres in height. It used 8 coal-fired furnaces to send hot water through 7 miles of pipes. A carriage drive ran through the length of the building between lush tropical vegetation. One W. Adam called it a mountain of glass, an unexampled structure like a sea of glass when waves are setting and smoothing down after a storm. During the First World War, coal was essential for the war effort, and so the conservatory was not heated and many of the plants died. The 9th Duke felt that heating and replanting the conservatory was an extravagance in a time of post-war austerity, and the Great Conservatory was demolished in 1920. Due to its size, this was a difficult job, taking over a week and more than £200 worth of explosives. And here you can just make out the walls and the footprint of the conservatory where Olivia is pointing to. So this just shows you the scale. It was huge. As time went on, Paxton and the 6th Duke grew bolder and ever more ambitious. Paxton ignited in the Duke an intense interest in horticulture, and together they travelled around Europe on the Grand Tour to further fuel their passion. The next feature that they embarked upon was the rock garden and the stride. This was not your average rock garden, but as was becoming a theme, the 6th Duke's rock garden was bigger and better than anyone else's. In 1842, Paxton began work on a rockery of gargantuan scale, piling rocks weighing several tons one on top of another. Paxton's inquisitive nature and industrious energy was unleashed by the 6th Duke's seemingly infinite funds. Paxton pushed the boundaries in architecture, engineering, horticulture and landscape design, and together this unique partnership resulted in radical changes to the garden. On viewing the rock garden for the first time, one man described the curious experience as follows. In one place, a sort of miniature Matterhorn apparently blocked the path, but with a touch of the finger it revolved on a metal axis and made a way to pass. Another rock is so balanced that it can be swayed with a little pressure. Incidentally, rather boringly, both rocks are now locked in place to comply with modern-day health and safety regulations. 2 rocks are named after the Queen and Prince Albert, and another after the Duke of Wellington, all of whom visited Chatsworth in the 6th Duke's time. The largest construction is the Wellington Rock and is nearly 14 metres high, and it has a waterfall running down it. The water flows into a pond created by Paxton called the Stride, named after a stretch of the River Wharfe on the Devonshire's Bolton Abbey estate. And just look at the beautiful view from up high, looking back towards the garden, from the rock garden down to that's the ring garden, that circular pond that we can just see in the distance. The following year, in 1843, Tsar Nicholas I of Russia informed the Duke that he was likely to visit Chatsworth the following year. In anticipation for this imperial visit, the Duke decided to construct, guess what, the world's tallest fountain, and set Paxton to work on it. The build began, and an 8-acre lake was dug on the moors, 350 feet, 110 metres above the house, to supply the natural water pressure needed. The work was finished in just 6 months, continuing at night by the light of flares, and the resulting water jet is on record as reaching a height of 296 feet, which is 90 metres. However, sadly, the Tsar died in 1855 and never saw the fountain. Don't you just hate that when somebody says they're going to come and then you get ready for them coming, make lots of preparations, in this case, build a fountain for them, and then they don't come, using the lame excuse that they've died. The fountain, as you see it now, is running on partial power, reaching just half its full height at 36 metres. The water power found a practical use, generating Chatsworth electricity from 1893 to 1936. The house was then connected to the mains and a new turbine was installed in 1988 that produces about a third of the electricity that the house needs. We have seen the main features from the 6th Duke's lifetime, and this bust commemorates all that he achieved. It is sited in a more modern part of the garden called the Serpentine Hedge, which consists of a wavy hedge beach corridor from the ring pond leading to the bust of the 6th Duke, and was planted in 1953. The 7th, 8th, 9th and 10th Dukes made few changes to the garden, which suffered in the Second World War, but the 11th Duke and his wife were keen gardeners and oversaw a revival. Garden personality Alan Titchmarsh wrote in 2003, "Chatsworth's greatest strength is that its owners have refused to let the garden rest on its Victorian laurels. It continues to grow and develop, and that is what makes it one of the best and most vibrant gardens in Britain. Many historical features have been immaculately restored, and unusually for a modern country house garden, many new features have been added, and we'll go and have a look at some of them." And built on the former site of the Great Conservatory is the maze, which was planted in 1962 using 1,209 yew plants to be precise. And here it is. We're just trying to work out how to get into the middle. It's actually quite a difficult maze. It's quite a puzzle. There are quite a lot of gaps in the hedge, but we're not going to cheat. We're sticking to the official way that you're meant to go and not cheating. So we'll just make our way into the middle. And is this it?
I think you're
Just when you think you're there. Let's just see. Oh, no. Oh.
got there in the end.
2 flower gardens occupy the rest of the site of the old conservatory.
Oh, that's nice. If it gets like that, then the
It's a single stem though, isn't it?
yeah, it's actually.
Very thick, lush planting. Here's a lovely clump of heleniums and Verbena bonariensis. So proving that Joseph Paxton wasn't the only one that could build a greenhouse. In 1970, the display greenhouse was built. Not as good looking, admittedly, as Joseph Paxton's greenhouse. It's more modern in style and a bit 1970s, but it's unobtrusively sited behind the first Duke's greenhouse. It has 3 climate zones: tropical, Mediterranean and temperate. Public access is limited, but groups may book tours, and there are first come, first served tours on a few days each season. So look at this beautiful lush planting. A real strong interest of the current Duke is the are sculptures and art, and this is dotted throughout the garden. Look at this beautiful chair made of old coins. It looks really, really cool. And sculpture is just dotted all over in the grounds. It really just adds to the experience. Things like this one, this is the Walking Madonna by Dame Elizabeth Frink, and then also the War Horse, which is a really striking one too, here in the courtyard. I think now we need a little sit down and a little rest before heading to the cottage garden and the kitchen garden. And we'll just pop in here first. You can always tell a lot about a place by the toilets, and this is a very grand and lovely toilet. And we'll just head over to the ice cream stand and get ourselves an ice cream, and I can wholeheartedly recommend the ice cream served at this little stall. So it's been lovely, everybody's having a great time. It's really busy, but it's big enough to take it, and everyone seems to be really enjoying themselves. Now refreshed, we'll head now into the cottage garden. So the cottage garden was inspired by an exhibit in 1988 at the Chelsea Flower Show. It's meant to represent a front garden of flower beds bordered by box, and it leads to a kitchen stroke dining room with furniture made out of plants, all covered in plants, and there's also a bedroom in the same style on the upper floor. So it's really informal. Japanese anemone in the box area, and that must be the fireplace with the red flowers representing the flames. You can see the furniture that's been made out of box hedging, so it's quite quirky and quite nice. And this is, I think this is a little table and chairs, and from up here beautiful views back over the cottage garden and the more formal garden beyond that. And on our walk to the kitchen garden, some beautiful small trees. This one is Acer Griseum with the red bark which peels. It looks lovely, and this looks like an acer, so both great trees for small gardens. And here in the distance looks like a big pumpkin or a big apple, so that signifies that this is the way to the vegetable garden.
Oh, they're so cute, pear and apple. I love a kitchen garden. Welcome to the kitchen and cutting garden. It's quite a sturdy structure, isn't it? That they're, you know, that it's obviously going to grow through that. It's quite elaborate.
Oh, this is lovely, because I swear it just had nothing in it.
Have you been? Oh, you didn't. It didn't have anything in it. Look at the apples. Oh wow! Where do we start? Look, they look good apples. They're cookers.
It's so exciting seeing all of this, so much fruit, such a lot of different varieties of apples and fruits, and everything that you can possibly imagine is growing here. It's absolutely fantastic and really productive area, and all this will be used to supply the restaurant and also the farm shop. And here are some cabbages, masses of cabbages, and they're not covered. I don't know how they're not getting eaten. Mine get decimated if I don't cover them. Maybe it's the scarecrow, maybe it's there was a spinny thing back there, so maybe it's that, but they don't seem to have much damage on them, and they're planted en masse, and the smell of cabbages is quite abundant. The kitchen garden was relocated to this site behind the stables in the 1990s, which is much more convenient than its original location by the river in the park. And that noise was just the loudspeaker telling us that the garden is closed. So as is tradition, Livy and I always stay to the bitter end, and we usually have to be kicked out of gardens when everybody else has gone home, and today is no different. We're just really enjoying it here. It's so tranquil, so peaceful, there's nobody else around. It's beautiful, and the evening sunlight is just making everything glow. So like any good kitchen garden, there are lots of flowers growing principally for cutting, and there are also some growing, as we saw there, the nasturtiums growing as companion plants for the fruit and vegetables. And look at this collection of cut flowers, all beautiful ones for drying. I think that's amaranthus, Mine didn't look like that. Mine was kind of very small. I think it likes quite fertile soil, which ours isn't, so ours was kind of stunted, but we did get some flowers. And here are masses and masses of straw flowers, quite like the colours that I've got at home, and I've really enjoyed growing them this summer. And every kitchen garden needs somewhere for the gardener to shelter from the weather and also to have their lunch. And here is this lovely little bothy, which has been preserved from World War II. It's really lovely, but you can imagine in the bleak winter months, it can be quite cold here up on this hill. In fact, Olivia can testify to that because the last time she was here was in the winter, and it was really, really cold with driving rain, and it wasn't a very pleasant place to be. And this scarecrow looks like a friendly, jovial sort of chap, but he seems to be doing his job because the cabbages look great. And more flowers which can be picked and used in the house or maybe sold in the farm shop. Here's masses of buddleia. There's irises in that bed. And there were peonies as well. And there's some phlox, white phlox. So plenty of flowers to pick. And some hydrangeas here. And what else have we got? Hollyhocks, and some more hollyhocks there, and some antirrhinums down here. All lovely colours. And I think we'd better start heading. We're heading down the hill, just leaving. That's the sign for where we came in. We're just heading further down the hill. More vegetables. There's masses and masses of spinach and chard. So much to pick. And then just down here is actually an orchard. So not only have they got all the apples that we've seen here, but just further down the hill, there's a whole huge orchard with loads more apples. Livy's going around eating apples, which I said to her, she probably shouldn't do that. But actually seeing the number that they've got, I don't think they would begrudge her an apple or two. So she's just going around eating some of them. But all of these will go to the farm shop, I guess. So fantastic, so much to see, and lots of inspiration on how things are growing. I always like to see how other people do things. Look at that tree, is just laden with apples. So we're heading back towards the house. People are just leaving now, and we've had a wonderful day. It's been absolutely wonderful. And there's always lots and lots going on at Chatsworth. They're very involved in the local community. And here there's a vintage cars. There's big events going on. I don't really know what they all are, but there's stuff going on all the time. So people come for all different reasons. There's been tents and caravans and things on the site. And then there was something going on in the courtyard. People were marching. I'm not quite sure what all that was about, but it's a very busy place, and there's always things going on. And it looks like here there's going to be a dog show, and this little dog's just getting in a little bit of practice before everyone else arrives. Through here is the little courtyard, and this is where the farm shop is. There is a restaurant on site, but we figured that would probably be quite expensive. So we just bought a sandwich. It was a little sandwich bar, but it was just a sort of standard. It wasn't a great sandwich. Whereas I did read someone saying that it's a good idea to go to the farm shop and buy some lovely fresh vegetables or sandwiches or bread or something, buy things there and enjoy a picnic. That's a better way of doing it. Or of course, bring your own picnic. But if that would be a better way of doing it, and a lot cheaper to do it that way. There's also flowers for sale, plants for sale, and just over here there are some lovely house plants as well. So Duchess Deborah, the last Duchess, was really quite instrumental in making Chatsworth a viable business, because it takes an awful lot of money to keep a house like this going. So as we discussed in the last video, it was her that tried to sort of make it a viable business going forward, securing it for the future.
So I think we've reached the end of the video, and although there are many more features and areas that we haven't covered, it's well worth visiting Chatsworth if you do get the chance, because there's so much that I couldn't possibly include in one video. So if you get the chance, pay Chatsworth a visit. You won't be disappointed. So in subsequent videos, I want to use all that we've learned from Chatsworth to think about how to use elements in our own small domestic gardens
and look at the design of that. And I often get asked by people who are new to gardening or taking on a new garden just how to begin. It's really difficult and really daunting when you're faced. This garden was a really blank canvas. We had a dead cherry tree, we had overgrown hedges that weren't very nice, and lots of grass, and it really was a blank canvas, which is great, but it's also quite daunting. So just trying to work out how to begin is often the hardest. So I get asked that quite a lot, maybe people taking on new gardens, how to go about it. So I thought it would be fun to start a series of videos on how to design a garden in the English garden style as an amateur gardener, and perhaps just share some tips and tricks that I've learned throughout this process. We've been doing this garden for 15 years. We've still got masses, those of you that follow the channel will know, we've still got lots and lots and lots that we want to do. So I think it's going to be my life's work, or our life's work, getting this garden to the standard and the way we want it. So we've probably done things the long way round, but in doing so, I think I've learned a lot more doing it that way. But I'm happy to share just things, experiences that we had, and perhaps how to do it quicker and avoid perhaps as many mistakes as we've made. So if you like what we do, don't forget to like and subscribe, and join us again in the next video. Bye for now. You like that? You like that?